Now that we've got the add item and the remove item controls hooked up, let's go ahead and set up the reverse control. So we're going to go into our app state, and like before, we're actually going to make a specific atom for the is reversed state. So we're going to go up here underneath use toggle choice and say const is reversed atom equals atom, and then again we have to give it a key. We'll just take this constant name, or sorry, variable name, whatever you want to call these things in JavaScript, and say default, and in this case it will be false by default. We'll make those helper hooks that we have in all the other cases, so export function use is reversed, and that will just return use recoil value, and then is reversed atom. Go ahead and duplicate these lines and say use set is reversed, and then we'll say use set recoil state, and that's all we need for those. So then the final thing that we actually need is we need to add another hook called use reverse item IDs. So we really only need to reverse the item IDs themselves since we made that its own atom. So we'll get const set item IDs, use set item IDs, and then we need to return a function. Doesn't take any arguments. We'll say set item IDs, and then we'll take the previous, or rather we're actually going to pass in produce, and we'll take the draft, and we'll do draft.reverse. We don't want to return the results of draft.reverse because we're actually just mutating it. So we'll just, we pass that void in first. And then also we need to make sure that we set is reversed as the opposite of itself. So we need to get that too. So we'll say const set is reversed equals use set is reversed. And then set is reversed. Under here, we'll say, we'll just take the previous and we'll do the opposite. We don't need to use emmer here. We don't need to use that produce function because we're not actually mutating anything. So let's take this, go into the controls. We'll go ahead and import it here. And before we've been adding them all here, but we really don't need to do that because we actually have this reverse control we separated out. So we'll go ahead and add it here. So we'll say const reverse item IDs equals that. We also want to get this is reversed. So const is reversed equals use is reversed. So now we got both those values and we can delete this. And let's just keep the name the same here and go ahead and delete that. We don't need to make that inline anonymous function. We can delete this, and we're not using use app state anymore. So that should work. And we reverse the list, and it works exactly like we want, which is really great. So again, we were able to leverage the fact that we had already separated the state out previously. This is reverse state, and so here again we're kind of keeping it separate and as its own atom, and so this reverse control kind of maintains its own state. Yet when it's called, it's reversing the order of this list. But these other controls aren't having to be messed with, and the actual values inside of these aren't being messed with. So that's really nice. All right, let's add one thing that's definitely missing here that is different from the previous one. Basically, if I refresh the page, there's no initial items. So we're going to go ahead and add a function that will add those initial items. And this function, well, it's actually going to be a hook. So export function use, we're going to call this use add initial items. Use add initial items. And then we'll do this. So this is a situation where we might want to actually use a higher order component, just depending on people's personal preferences. So what we're going to do is we're going to add this to the cards component itself, and it's just going to call it to set up those initial values. And this is maybe feels a little bit awkward. Part of it is just because of the fake API that we have and the fake data that we have. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to get that add item that we created before from use add item, that hook, and then we're also going to set up a state called items count, set items count, and this will be using use state with a value of 0 at the start. Then we're going to use a use effect. So basically what we're doing here is we're kind of making an asynchronous loop that's going to loop through and add all of the actual data into the items themselves. So again, this may kind of feel awkward, but this is kind of the easiest way, I think, to get it hooked up with Recoil. That is also going to scale with the initial data that we had. Maybe we wanted to change what that initial data was or how many items there were. So we're going to say if the items count is less than the fake data.length, and for this scenario, it's just going to be 2, how we have it set up. Then we'll add item, and that will go ahead and take in the fake data with the items counts. We'll start, with 0, but then we're actually going to iterate using set items count. For the previous one, we'll add 1. Add these dependencies so that this doesn't continue to run forever and ever, ever. So basically, we're going to add the first one, and then we'll add the second one, and then this will, no longer be the case. And really, nothing's getting updated here, so this use effect shouldn't even run anymore. But if it ever does run again, it's not really a problem because we've got this guard here, and so it's just going to prevent anything from happening. So we need to take this for this to actually work and go into cards, and we're just going to call it. So again, some people may feel a little bit better using this in like a hooks kind of setting, or sorry, not a hooks setting. That's what we're doing here. Some people might feel more comfortable as this as a higher order component, but it's perfectly fine as a hook like this. Now it is failing because I actually made a mistake in the previous video, and I set a default value to this object here. And so basically it's trying to pull out from this object options, but those don't exist, they're undefined. So anyway, we really actually want this to be undefined in this case, because what's going to happen here is in the card, if it doesn't find the item, or if it's if it's any faulty value, in this case undefined, it's going to return null. So basically it's trying to render it a little bit too early. So we can clear these, let's reset this, and we can see all those exist. We can remove them, add them, reverse the list, and everything works exactly like we want to, which is perfect. It's exactly what we want, obviously. So let's go ahead and clean up kind of this old state that we had. We really don't need all of this just old stuff we had, and this is going to help kind of make clear what exactly is missing. So let's just start deleting everything that's kind of below our our recoil stuff. So if we delete all of that, we're going to get some errors that should help us find what the problem is. So app state, we don't need that app state provider anymore. We can delete those 2 lines. Save, and that should be good. So reset data, of course, is a problem. So let's find reset data. So for now, we're just going to say const reset data equals there, and then constant. I don't know how many times a day I write const constant. We'll delete that, so we should be good there. Use app state dispatch. Yeah, this is not a thing anymore. Delete that. We don't have an idea of really what a dispatch is anymore. Of course, we can delete this, set that up that way. And everything should be good. Of course, reset preferences doesn't really do anything. It should be better to change things. So that doesn't do anything, but we cleaned everything up, so that's good. And we saw kind of where we had some old data. So finally, we can just add the, use reset data. So we'll say function, rather export function, use reset data. And then what are we going to do here? Well, we want to return some sort of a function that when it's called, it'll actually reset the data. But here, there's a lot that's going on when you reset the data. You're resetting all these specific items and stuff, and you're also reversing the list. So it's a lot easier to go ahead and reach for something else in Recoil, and that something else is called a selector. And I'm actually going to get a lot more into what these selectors are in the next video. But for now, let's just call it reset items selector. And then we'll say is selector. Go ahead and auto import that. Now, just like everything in Recoil, this needs a key, so it kind of can be thought of sort of as an atom, but like a highly kind of specialized one is the way I think about it. So the nice thing with selectors is you can define a get and you can define a set. And so what that means is whenever you are using like I'm trying to find an example of it, use recoil value and you pass in a selector, it will go ahead and basically call that get value. And if you're using a setter, it'll go ahead and call that set value and give you back whatever you defined in them. So in this case, we're not going to, actually create a get value because we don't really need one here. And this may be, unconventional. This may not be what people necessarily recommend to me, but to me, it's really okay. I honestly think, the getters are really powerful because you can kind of create these very simplified versions of how to get specific data, and we're going to do that more next time. But for this, I think it's actually a little bit more powerful because you can create a very specific setter. So what you can do with this set is you define it such as just an anonymous function. You can pull out a couple things. So you can pull out a get and a set as well. And what these are little helper functions basically that when you wrap them around an atom, they will actually get that atom or set that atom with a new value. So let's go ahead and make this into a new line. And we'll say IDs. And then how do we actually get the item IDs? Well, we call get, and then we call item IDs atom. So here we can't really use those hooks because we're not in a hook setting, but we have this, kind of way to actually get and set things. So now that we have the item IDs, we can actually iterate all over all of them, which is really exactly what we want. But we also do need the is reversed. So let's get that too. Say is reversed atom. And then we're going to say, hey, if it is reversed, then we need to do some things. We need to actually go ahead and reverse. So we'll say set is reversed. Oops, is reversed. Right, and we're going to take that atom, sorry, because we're doing the actual setter, and we're going to set it to false. So we're saying if it was reversed, we're now resetting that atom to be false. And then we also need to set the item IDs atom to, we're going to call produce because it's actually the exact same kind of, well, it's not, sorry, it's not the exact same thing. We're just calling produce so we can easily do a similar thing that we had. So must not have spelled something correctly there. Yeah, items, IDs, atoms. Atom. And so then we can take what we previously had, because we got that just then. We take those, and then we're given a draft back. So this is the non-queried way to write a produce function. You pass in directly whatever you're trying to create a copy of and change and stuff. And then your second argument is the recipe itself. So we'll say produce and then draft and then void draft dot reverse. So it's the exact same thing. We can't use the hook that we had before because again, we're not in a hook setting. You can't call hooks outside of other hooks or other components, unfortunately. So that's what we do in the case of a reverse. So that's pretty simple. But now how do we actually reset all of the items themselves? So we'll go item IDs dot for each. We'll take that ID. We'll iterate over, we'll say const item atom equals items atom family. And then, of course, as always, we have to pass in that ID. So we got the item atom. We haven't actually gotten it yet necessarily. So we're going to say const item equals get item atom. And then with that, what we're going to do is we're going to say const reset item equals produce again. We'll take the item, we'll draft it. So we're creating a copy now. And we'll say const options equals object.values draft.options. And then with those options, what are we going to do? We're going to go options.for each. And then for each option, we're going to say option.value equals false. We just want to reset it. And, we just know that, the default value is supposed to be false. That's just something we know in this situation. We really probably should be storing that somewhere. And then finally, we want to set the item atom that we got previously, and this is why we wrote it out like this and didn't, wrap this in get, because we need this for the setter itself. And as a second argument to the setter, we can pass in that reset item, and that will go ahead and reset it. So there we have our selector, but how do we actually call this? Well, let's go back to what we were trying to work on originally. We've got our use reset data. So what we want to do is we want to return use set recoil state, and we'll pass it in. So now we passed in the selector. We're using use set recoil state. So it's going to pull out that set, and that's really what it's returning. It's returning basically this whole sort of thing with it all worked out, these getters and setters already working, which is pretty cool to me. So let's go into the controls and let's pull it out. We're going to say use reset data, and here we should just be able to replace it and it should work. So let's try this. Oops, didn't mean to zoom in there. We'll add these two and we'll hit reset preferences and to reset them, which is just, exactly what we want. Let's add some more items. We'll go down, we'll change this one to tigers. We're going to reverse it. We're going to hit reset, and the order reverse, the reverse turned back to false, and everything worked exactly like we want, which is super great. So recoil, really nice way to just set up your state as atoms and make it more reactive. You're subscribing your components to the things that they directly relate to. You're not having to deal so much with context and lifting stuff up and pulling it around. You just declare them all and then use them wherever you want them. But I think a lot of this is kind of ugly. We really, used, let me delete these. We used use state and use effect a little bit more than maybe I would have liked to. But there's definitely ways to clean that up by leveraging those use selectors. And we're going to get into the next video. There is one thing I did want to point out, and this may have been bothering a lot of people, but there's this warning that we're getting, and it says cannot update a component batcher while rendering a different component card. Basically what's going on there is that's kind of some of the internals of Recoil and just some of the state of React right now. This warning should eventually go away. So if this warning bothers you so much that you really don't want to use Recoil, that's fine. You don't have to use Recoil. But you also can, there's probably ways you could rewrite some of this stuff that would avoid it. But, this is just kind of the case that I found with using those atom families and stuff like that, and just as Recoil is now that you get this, but I haven't really found it to actually be a problem itself.